The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, in the book called I Hate Myself, Overcome Self-Hatred and Realise Why You're Wrong About You, internationally known assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Blaise Aguirre, I'm hoping I've pronounced that right, tackles the pervasive and often ignored issue of self-hatred. He joins us now. Welcome to the show, Blaise.
Thank you very much from a very cold Boston.
Oh, wow. Well, it's quite a warm Spain here. And I detect, is Aguirre, is that a Spanish name?
It is. I'm actually a Basque.
Oh.
So I have, even though I grew up in South Africa, I have British, Irish heritage, half, and then half Iberian, of which the predominance is Basque. And as my brother likes to point out, 4% Neanderthal. So my mother was Spanish from Madrid.
Oh, from Madrid. Wonderful, wonderful. I thought I recognised the surname. Now, the title of the book, I Hate Myself, it's quite a strong title. Is this common for people to feel that way?
Well, I tell you, when I first started writing about it, my hope was to help people who were struggling with deep, deep suicidality. And the cohort of people that I thought, struggle with true, unrelenting, unchanging self-hatred was a small group. But subsequent to the book coming out, it literally just came out a couple of weeks ago, I've been inundated with emails and phone calls from people who tell me that they identify so strongly with the construct. So, there's very, very little research actually on the number of people who have this like true core self-hatred. And I thought it was going to be a small number, but if the number of emails is anything to go by, it's actually a much, much bigger problem than I thought.
Yeah, I would imagine not a lot of people would like to admit it until somebody like yourself, writes a book about it, and then it becomes a bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing, and I've really been thinking a lot about this, and, that if a human being has an experience that feels alien to them, sort of you go around the day and you don't have a headache and suddenly you have a headache, you can compare not having a headache to having a headache. But if you've grown up as a child deeply hating yourself, it's the only thing you know. It's like a fish only knows water. It doesn't know what it's like to not be in water. So I think that maybe it's also possible that people just didn't think of it as sort of pathology per se, because it was just the thing that they knew.
Yeah, I suppose if a child grows up, we're very good on labels nowadays, aren't we? With a label of not being very nice or not feeling very nice, not liking oneself, is going to carry on through adulthood.
That's what certainly that was what was happening with the patients that I was treating, is that, that they didn't know a time when they had affection for themselves, when they liked themselves at all. And, there are definitely people who go through life. Many of us who are, dissatisfied with moments and might even, have strong dislike for oneself because of the choices that you've made in any given moment. Maybe a bad partner, maybe a bad business decision or something, you're dissatisfied. Oh, I hate myself or something like that. But that's not the self-hatred that I'm talking about, because you just recognize that you might have messed up in that moment. Maybe you're in a career or in a relationship that you don't like and you're dissatisfied with that, but that that's not like intrinsic to you. The group of people I'm talking about have lived with this experience for such a long time that they don't know what it's like not to experience this.
So if that's the case, if it's ingrained in them, how do you as a psychiatrist help them then?
Yeah. So this was a big problem because, psychiatry and certainly, I work with people who are very, very suicidal and self-destructive, and I can help reduce many of those symptoms, whether it's anxiety or depression or obsessions and compulsions, whether it's suicidal behavior. I can help them with toxic and dangerous relationships. But I was trying to work on this self-hatred piece, and nothing that I ordinarily did seemed to help. And so, treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, emotion-focused therapy, the loving compassion therapy, and all these sorts of things didn't seem to make a dent in the self-hatred. So I started to think about its genesis, because a child's not born hating itself. And so, well, then how does it develop self-hatred? It has to learn how to hate itself. And that's where I realized that I had a bit of an a bit of a wedge there, because if a child could learn to hate itself, it could learn to love itself, because love certainly comes much more naturally to the human heart than hatred does. And so by pointing out that it was a learned concept of self, not an intrinsic part of self, and that there had been teachers of self-hatred, bullies, people who were hurtful, people who, were damaging in some way, and that as a young child you had no perspective, no context in which to kind of see those really hurtful lessons in, and that it was understandable that you would come to the conclusion that you were somehow flawed irredeemably, and that you could feel different than what you're feeling by doing certain practices. So it was focusing on the idea that it was learned rather than intrinsic, that you had teachers of this kind of way of thinking, and that continuing to follow those teachers' teachings was would continue to be very, very damaging. If you think a little bit about this, many of us have very domineering people in our lives who insist that the way that we're living our lives is incorrect, and we somehow feel we need to please these people, but they're actually the wrong people to follow. If you're going to follow someone, if you're going to follow someone's teachings, follow the teachings of people who are happy. Never get advice from people who are so miserable, because what they're doing is teaching you how to be miserable.
Yeah.
But yet, all too often, we're getting advice from, the way that you're doing things is wrong, and you should do it this way. And you say, well, I don't know if I should do it that way. You don't seem very happy yourself. So,
yeah, do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
So, do you think is it mainly down to the parents? Do we learn how we feel about ourselves from our parents?
I mean, so one of the other things that was common to all the people who had core self-hatred is that they were highly sensitive people, and so somebody who's highly sensitive, say you have an allergy to peanuts or to some allergen, and then you have a very, very big reaction. So now imagine that you were allergic effectively to very small slights. So so something like, you're chubby, or you're fat, or you're stupid, or something like that. Now, some children who are not very highly sensitive might hear those kinds of comments and be annoyed by them, but brush them off. To the highly sensitive person, high sensitivity is like super to these labels, and they stick. And so I don't think that there has to be necessarily cruelty or negativity. And often parents can try to be very, very kind. But what they're missing is that their highly sensitive child is experiencing a sense of self that is very damaging to the self. So there might, of course, be parents, teachers, bullies in school, and others who are effectively teaching the child that they're deeply flawed. But in some cases, it's a negation of the child's inner experience. So the child themselves don't feel that good about themselves. And they say something like, I don't have any friends and no one likes me. And the parent, out of kindness, says, don't be silly. That's just not true. Lots of people like you, and it sort of rejects that the child's experience is a false experience, when that's the child's experience. And even if it's false, simply telling the child that it's not true doesn't actually help the child integrate that it's not true.
No.
It starts to think that oh, I must have faulty thinking,
Yeah.
and thereby proving that I'm flawed. And so rather than, simply saying, don't be silly, that's not true, it's like listening to the child and saying, well, how did you get there? What makes you think that that's the way that, that nobody likes you? What's going, that sort of thing.
I suppose if the child's sensitive, that it's like nature versus nurture, isn't it? If the child's sensitive, it's probably come genetically from the parents or one of the parents anyway. But the fact that they are sensitive, which will produce strong emotions in them, is nurture, because you learn that sort of behavior, I suppose.
Well, the part that's biology and nature is being emotionally sensitive, so that a child that is born highly sensitive feels things quicker, to smaller provocation, with more intense, with more intensity and longer duration, and then it takes them longer to get back to their emotional baseline, and so that's just biology, and that is genetically derived, and often we see highly sensitive children born to highly sensitive parents. And so that's not the problem in and of itself. I mean, without highly sensitive people, we wouldn't have artists and actors and actresses and sculptors and possibly, some politicians. But so that part is the biology. Where it becomes the environment comes in is when the environment rejects a child's experience as being overly dramatic or being too sensitive or being making a big deal out of things. When it's sort of like, imagine telling a child that has a bad peanut allergy, it's like, look, your brothers and sisters don't have this allergy, you're making a big deal out of it. Well, I mean, that's biology, acting with the peanut. And the same way, a highly sensitive child reacting to these labels, that simply telling someone not to feel the way they're feeling isn't going to overcome it. So the biology is the high sensitivity. The environment is the messaging that these children receive.
So I suppose in your line of work, it's not just the children that you need. If we're talking about children, of course, we could be talking about adults. But if the child's got self-loathing, then you need to talk to the parents as well, because the parents need educating on how to talk to the children. Exactly
right. And in fact, in my program, the program I run that we started at McLean Hospital, famous for Girl Interrupted, parenthetically, and many young people like to, who come say, "Hey, is this what Girl Interrupted says?" And say yes. But that we tell the parents that we cannot work with their kids if they themselves aren't going to work with us, because parents have to learn the children's language, but children also have to learn the parents' language, so that learning how to speak in more effective ways is critical to the work that we do. I mean, even though we often think that people are intentionally trying to upset us, there's not a single parent that I know who wakes up some morning and says, my child is doing perfectly well. I think I want them to have mental illness, so I'm going to go and annoy the heck out of them. And there's no child who sort of says, my parents are too comfortable in their lives, and I'm going to sort of misbehave in ways that are really going to upset them. It's just, people are doing what they do, and that, as long as the other person isn't impacted, people just go along on their lives. But when there's a mismatch between behaviors and interactions, then all kinds of chaos can ensue. But it's rarely done with any kind of intentionality. But people feel it's intentional, saying, "Oh, my child is really upsetting me," or like, "You're doing this to me." But I mean, who would want to bring more chaos into their life? Very few of us. And it's just that, so one of the things that we think, with the way that we work, is rather than thinking that, that people are behaving with intention, is that people are doing the best they can. And the fact that they behave in ways that are ineffective is a lack of skill rather than an intention. Yeah, it sounds like it. It really does. And are there any case studies in the book? Any examples? Yeah. So when I as a kind of a bit of a researcher and on the faculty at Harvard, that when I came up against the problem of self-hatred, I went to the literature and said, okay, so these days you ask AI, find me every single paper on self-hatred, the legitimate ones, not the ones that you just made up, and tell me what they say. And 3 papers came up, and I thought, what? Like, why is this experience that makes people feel so burdensome and so alone that they contemplate suicide as a solution, something that's so important? Why is so little being written up about? So, so there's nothing in the literature. So, that I decided that it would be more of like a kind of a naturalistic description of these experiences. And so I interviewed patients that have worked with me, that gave me permission to kind of use their words, and who tell me what their experience like was from early childhood to then overcoming self-hatred. And so there are case studies. There's not like, in other words, there are case studies throughout the book. There's not, I haven't done it in a way that, say, patient A and then patient A shows up throughout the book. I've scattered it enough because even though people gave me permission to use their stories, I still didn't want to make them in any way identifiable. So there are lots and lots of case studies, but I've changed some of the details so that even though case 1 and case 2 may be the same case, I've sort of changed it up so that no one would be identifiable.
Yeah, indeed. Well, the book provides crucial insights. It's very important to have self-care and self-love. Not always easy, though. It's called I Hate Myself, Overcome Self-Loathing and Realize Why You're Wrong About You. It's by Blaise Aguirre, who we're speaking to now. Aguirre, I should know, shouldn't I? And it's out now. Blaise, if people want to find out more about you, do you have any sort of website or social media or anything?
Yeah, I haven't been a big social media person because I actually think that social media markets to self-hatred. You're not tall enough, pretty enough, have nice enough skin, long enough hair, thin enough, etc. And so but nevertheless, it's useful when it spreads a message. So I'm, as a medical doctor, so I'm at Blaise MD, Blaise MD. And but I've only got an X account and a Twitter account. I've tried to stay off social media, and but my program at McLean Hospital is the number 3, the word east.org.
Right,
and it's
3east.org. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's been fascinating to chat to you. I could have chatted to you longer if we'd have had more time, but thank you for your time today, Blaise Aguirre.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.